Here we are, the first jurisdiction in Canada to actually put a price in carbon.
Great ideas have died from inception because they lack access to capital.
Because there needs to be risk capital, patient capital that can come in that says, yes, this works in the field in -35 in northern Alberta.
Because innovation happens everywhere. Alberta's trying to solve a problem or problems that the entire world is trying to solve.
And again, I think it comes down to absolutely this program, but also the skills, the workforce, the geology, and that innovative spirit that we see here that I think makes Alberta such a special place.
What is good for Alberta? What is good for Albertans? And how do we help solve this global problem?
We're investing in things that matter. We're investing in things that the marketplace thinks there's going to be a future for this technology.
At the same time, these projects are inspiring and they show the art of the possible and that there is a path to decarbonization right in front of us.
I'm of the firm belief that, end of the day, what we did in Alberta as the original ERA, the growth of what we've accomplished in a short period of time is simply overwhelming. It is beyond what I ever expected when we put it together.
Emissions Reduction Alberta, an organization founded with the goal of doing, well, just that. Over their 15-year history, ERA, funded by the Government of Alberta's Tier Fund, has funded projects estimated to reduce emissions by 117 megatons by 2050. These projects sparked the creation of Holy Grail technologies, whose impacts are felt around the world. But an organization like theirs, an external bridge between industry and government, is unique by today's standards. Back in 2007, when the world was still figuring out a path forward in reducing emissions, that idea was groundbreaking, and it needed people willing to fight for it.
At that time, there were, of course, a number of ideas that are put forward across Canada. One of them, of course, the standard, well, it's just tax. We tax, we'll change behavior, and Albertans are a bit of a different breed when it comes to politics. I think if it was just simply a tax, and we will make the decision as to where that money should go, I am positive we would not have to buy it. So with working with industry, what then was agreed on was a carbon levy on the largest emitters, and this levy would go into a fund.
And it's through that carbon levy on the high industrial emitters that they acquired funds, that they created our agency, Emissions Reduction Alberta, in order to invest those funds back into technology that would reduce emissions and also create economic opportunity, create jobs.
And so we really were taking a bit of a leap into the unknown of trying out this model and seeing, can a government agency make investments in an independent and effective way?
Because at that time, remember, industry had a choice. They could either participate or they buy offset credits someplace else. Well, they made a choice to invest their money in the ERA.
So I was part of the original service provider team that laid the foundation for the organization. But in those early days, it was literally, how do we pay people? How do we get contracts signed? How do we set up the processes and policies we need to make sure that we're really strong stewards of public money? And the focus was about laying a foundation, building reputation, building trust.
You know, I can recall back in the day we were a virtual organization, and so I was coming in as a junior employee just to help out on this file. And coming from elsewhere in government and just seeing the nimbleness of the organization, the real sense of mission and purpose, but then the entire organization fit in a tiny room we borrowed from our lawyers' offices, right? So 5 of us in the room, and we're responsible for taking on this huge task.
Because it was a large amount of money that they were basically transferring to an organization, and they had to sort of back off and say, okay, we understand your processes, you understand what we're trying to achieve, go out and do what you guys do best. And I think that's what made us successful, and that's what makes ERA so unique in today's environment.
ERA now had their feet under them. In 2009, they named Eric Newell as their first board chair. And working under their founding name, Climate Change and Emissions Management Corporation, they strengthened the governance and organizational processes that would guide them for years to come. In June 2010, they awarded $71 million to 16 greenhouse gas reducing projects, marking their first steps into the world of project evaluation and funding.
In Canada, our financial landscape is very conservative, and it's hard for early innovators to often get financing to try things that have never been tried before. So we step in and fill a really important role within that financing landscape to indicate that this is worth taking a risk on.
I used to say, you know, we typically selected 1 out of 10 proposals. So one organization thought we were brilliant and 9 thought we weren't so smart. But I think people respected the process.
Investing in projects that are at this stage of development, in this gray area, in that valley of death, is particularly challenging. We don't have a textbook to follow, we don't have a standard rate of return or a standard project design to follow. And we're not at the super early stage of research where we can accept a huge failure rate or even, you know, a venture capital failure rate. ERA's project rate of project success is significantly higher than any venture capital organization.
And so our focus at ERA is really to fund those late stage, first of kind implementation, demonstration projects that are really going to be game changers if they're commercialized and widely deployed in the marketplace.
So how would you weight a project that creates 10 jobs today versus one that creates only 5 but might create 100 jobs in 5 years? And these sort of trade-offs are where we bring in the subject matter experts to frankly bring their judgment to bear on the project. And it's only by weighing off the opinions of multiple experts on a single project that we can actually get a robust answer.
The years that followed saw more funding calls and more projects launched. Funding calls designed to support government policy and reflect where different industries were heading. Things like the Grand Challenge that supported innovative carbon use, the Oil Sands Innovation Challenge, the Industrial Efficiency Challenge, and the Food, Farming, and Forestry Challenge, to name a few. Each of these funding calls represented tens or hundreds of millions of dollars injected into emissions-reducing projects, many of which are the first of their kind in Canada or even the world.
It's very hard to tell Alberta's story. But the reality is we are actually doing things on the ground in all of our sectors to deploy technologies that have not been deployed elsewhere in Canada or elsewhere in the globe.
From geothermal to CCUS to hydrogen.
Agriculture and agri-food, forestry, pulp and paper, oil and gas, transportation.
Everything from using drones to plant trees to sequestering CO2 and cement. So we spent a lot of time talking with industry, going around the world saying, where is technology heading? Where is the opportunities in Alberta? Where are we now? Where are the gaps in terms of the emissions reductions we need? And is there a technology solution that'll close that gap?
My name's Kyle Mulligan.
My name is Madison Savlo.
I'm Rona Del Freri.
I'm John Redfern.
My name is Stanley Opara.
The very first grant that we got from ERA was one of the ones that actually kicked off our entire technology research and development.
Carbon Upcycling is a fantastic story. Carbon Upcycling was a company that was formed in and around one of our early competitions for CO2 utilization.
So our technology is a carbon capture and utilization process. And essentially what we're doing is we're taking CO2 emissions and we're storing and transforming those into a solid product, and into a solid material.
So this is, I think, one of the holy grail technologies that are out there. If you can imagine, our problem is all of these carbon emissions. If we can convert those into a value-added product instead of them just being a waste that needs to be disposed of, that really has transformative potential.
This funding goes to good use. Like when we received our funding, it's not like we're using this funding to be this glorified startup that's really exciting. You've got your ping pong tables and people are having a lot of fun. And we did have fun, but we were all grinding. As a company that's grown from 5 to 35 in the past 5 years, we've definitely taken on this realm of going global quickly. Achieving net zero and the challenges associated with that are not just associated to one region. This is a global expansive problem that we're tackling with our CCU technology, and in particular applying that to the cement sector.
Going global can come in many forms. One way is to solve a problem that has baffled innovators around the world for centuries.
The important thing for groups like ERA is to fund that first demonstration project where we can convince our clients that we got something that can actually work. If we do that, once you have that, once they can go and visit it, see it, touch it, smell it, whatever they do, then that unlocks the next round of funding, which you go from a few million to a few tens of millions. And then we get up to the layer where we are now, a few hundreds of millions per project.
Ever Geothermal, a company that started with a few geologists in a basement just a few years ago. We provided $1 million to them to trial their geothermal technology in Rocky Mountain House, Alberta. They're now exporting $100 million projects to Germany, to the US.
One of the advantages we had is we had all this oil and gas technology that we could apply to the problem of geothermal, but we had no geothermal. And that was actually important because down in the States they had some geothermal. It was very difficult for them to think outside the box, to think outside the existing paradigm, because they had it right in front of them. And so they were for decades and decades in the stage of tinkering, trying to make it better, but it was clear they were going down a dead end. For ourselves, we asked the question more innocently, why does geothermal suck so badly? I mean, why isn't someone doing it? Why isn't this entire town of oil and gas people jumping all over it when it has such a similar skill set?
This was a company that had a novel concept for geothermal, completely outside the box of what everyone was thinking about in geothermal at the time. They had an idea, they had some basic physics behind it, but they were essentially working out of a basement trying to prove this idea and validate that it could work. So ERA was one of the first investors in that technology at a time when they couldn't get money from the banks, they couldn't get money from incubators or venture capital, they couldn't really get money from almost anybody. But ERA stepped in with that risk capital, that patient capital to say, we evaluated this, we're ready to stand behind it and give it a try. It was one of those high risk, high reward opportunities where, hey, this is a new idea. If it works, it's going to revolutionize how geothermal energy is produced, not just in Alberta, but around the world.
These investments through Emissions Reduction Alberta are not only changing the energy future for us here, but for countries in other parts of the world like Germany, and really helping them to meet their energy demands in a sustainable, responsible way. I think that is exceptional and still supporting our traditional energy industry as we work to reduce emissions there as well.
While companies like Ever Geothermal represent brand new outlooks for supporting energy grids around the world, right here in Alberta, ERA is funding industry-leading grid innovation technologies. When it comes to our traditional power generation processes, groups like ENMAX and their Crossfield Energy Center represent a massive shift to how lithium-ion batteries can hybridize existing natural gas turbines to achieve electricity at near-zero emissions. Emerging technologies like these will have a positive impact on how the grid operates across the province.
And so the grid is so important to all of our economic activities in the province. How do we go about modernizing that grid and bringing it up to the best standard possible so that we can continue to provide clean, affordable, and reliable services to Albertans? Well, there's a whole new wave of technologies that ERA is investing in that can make that possible. Whether it's new sensors for power lines to help detect when they might fail or help put more power through them, new ways of providing grid services like spinning reserve, new ways to help, smartify everything, I guess is the way I would call it. So if we think about all of our infrastructure, all of our buildings, all of our vehicles, all of our appliances, these are all things that are now going to be connected to the internet, connected to each other, and connected to the grid. But we also know that the grid is a very complicated system. There's a lot of existing assets, and there's a need for it to be reliable. When you flick on the lights, you need that power to come into your house and illuminate your light bulb.
Energy comes in many forms. Alberta is known globally for its traditional energy industry. While they already operate under the highest industrial standards, there are some new ideas on the horizon that ERA is helping to take shape.
All of the easy ways to decarbonize in the oil and gas sector have already been done or are underway right now. The next stage of really attacking those significant emissions reductions are going to require very costly technology or technology that still hasn't even been fully developed.
And so within one company, Cenovus Energy, we've invested in the incremental efficiency upgrades for engines. We've invested in transitional technologies like next generation solvents and other bitumen extraction technologies. And we've invested in truly next generation opportunities such as small modular nuclear reactors.
Cenovus and our peers have been looking at the opportunity or the possibility for small modular nuclear reactors in the oil sands for quite a few years now. What small modular nuclear reactors offer is a way to create steam and electricity with zero emissions.
If there's a way to reduce the amount of steam you have to put down hole, or save energy when you make that steam, or recover that energy at the other end of the process, or hey, all of the above, then we should really be looking into that.
In the end, our sector needs to decarbonize. It's not a competitive advantage quite often for one company to decarbonize when the rest of the sector still isn't making progress. And so our attitude as Cenovus, and in working with our oil sands peers in particular, is that we all need to do it together. We all need to share the information that we know about how to decarbonize because it's for the good of all of us. And I know that ERA also shares that same commitment.
ERA shares the technology with the rest of the world. No matter what we do to limit our emissions, we still have to get other countries to participate.
The investment of public funds, there's got to be some public goods. And in the end, the reduction of emissions, for sure. But we're de-risking technology, so there's learnings that go on there, and the requirement for innovators to share their learnings with the ecosystem is a critical dividend out of ERA's work, that it allows mistakes to be understood and not repeated, and it allows successes to be understood and repeated.
One recent success is the growing understanding of how to monitor and mitigate methane emissions. But sometimes, to address an issue on Earth, you have to look to space.
Getting new technology off the ground, that is one of the most difficult things to ever happen when it's on Earth. Imagine when it's in space.
Got spar separation.
I had the opportunity recently to meet with the leaders at GHGSat, and their story is very compelling. So a company that began in Quebec, they are now deploying a constellation of new satellites to measure with more precision the greenhouse gas emissions around the world in real time.
GHGSat is basically a company that owns and operates satellites. So we have currently 12 satellites in space, basically monitoring and detecting global emissions, methane emissions.
They had put a satellite into orbit previously, somewhat validated the concept, but now they needed to scale. And how do you scale when your technology has to be put on top of a rocket and launched into orbit? Who's going to pay for that launch? And so, again, ERA is uniquely positioned to come in and say, wow, if we can, we look at the opportunity. If you could look down from space and see all of the methane emissions in the province all at once and pinpoint where the biggest ones are and go in and fix them, wouldn't that be an amazing solution?
But until recently, the attention has not been paid to methane. And the reason the attention is coming on methane right now is because it has a global warming potential of about 28 times more than CO2, which is the gas everyone talks about, right? But methane has 28 times more global warming potential than CO2 if you look at it over a 100-year time scale.
And so at a time when everyone was still sniffing around for methane with infrared cameras and handheld gas detectors, we invested in the next generation of methane detection technologies.
But now the entire aircraft team is based here in downtown Calgary. And the fact that GAGSAT has set up a presence here, employing people who are contributing to the economy of Alberta, I think that speaks to success of the decision that ERA made a few years ago.
While all these different technologies have implications and interest around the world, the funding provided by ERA has brought centers of excellence to Edmonton and Calgary, and even the small town of Innisfail, Alberta.
So one of the coolest projects in ERA's portfolio that I'm really excited to talk about is the first ever freight locomotive hydrogen train. So we received the ERA funding in June of 2021, and we had an ambitious goal to actually build 2 additional prototypes out of Innisfail, Alberta.
And so it's a seemingly elegant solution, but the hardcore engineering of how do you make a hydrogen locomotive is much more complicated than that.
And not only did we accomplish that, we actually deployed the units into actual service. So as of today, there are two days a week, there are actual crews using these locomotives in service to switch out cars in Calgary.
Those first 2 locomotives that we invested in, that was not a moneymaker or a profit center. That was a high-risk endeavor, but it had that potential.
The fact that we've developed this local ecosystem as well, with Innisfail, Alberta fabricating the conversion kits. We have OnTrack and Integral Controls here in Calgary developing the control systems for the locomotives. And then we've scaled up to 15 employees that are doing the electrical design, the software programming, and the testing. And the reality is that half the locomotive is an oil and gas system. You have hydrogen pressure vessels, you have stainless steel tubing, you have heat exchangers, liquid cooling systems. And so it's actually beneficial to develop this technology here in Alberta because the expertise from the oil and gas industry is already there. And what we're bringing to this industry now in this province is an expertise in batteries, fuel cells, and ultimately the integration of that and software development.
And so if we think about rail transport and transportation in general, that's a huge source of emissions in the province. So the fact that we can have a solution that essentially decarbonizes a huge chunk of that freight sector is transformative in and of itself. Then you think about the secondary and the follow-on effects from the project. So, okay, we're investing in new hydrogen fuel cell technology. What else can those fuel cells be used for? We're going to need hydrogen refueling infrastructure. Okay, well, if we have the customer in place for the locomotives, then we have a first use case for that fueling infrastructure. And again, you can duplicate that around the province.
Hydrogen is sort of a chicken and the egg in that you require off-takers to consume the fuel. However, the producers aren't going to mass produce hydrogen unless you have the off-takers. And so at CPKC, thanks to ERA's funding, we actually took the chance and built both the infrastructure and the locomotives. And so now that we have a stable platform for the locomotives that can be scaled up, we can work with hydrogen producers to now say, we actually have an application for you that's reliable, that's going to require this fuel. And so that's also creating a bit of an acceleration on that front from an infrastructure standpoint. Thanks to the funding and the scale up, we've been able to attract attention of one of the big US Class 1 railways, which is CSX Transportation. And so getting that credibility from a US Class 1 railway really demonstrates how significant this program has become and how credible we are with this program as an industry. And so having another Class 1 starting to adopt this technology because of the work that we have done is now going to potentially accelerate the adoption of this technology across North America and eventually the world. So the ERA funding, without it, we would never have been able to achieve that credibility or the visibility that would be required for this technology to be adopted at the pace that it's currently being adopted.
Supporting the commercialization of groundbreaking technologies is at the core of what ERA does. But their impact on the province doesn't stop there. From hosting the Spark Conference in 2019 and bringing the world to Alberta, or taking Alberta to the world with delegations at global conferences like COP, ERA is a community connector, a knowledge base, and a central hub for the innovation ecosystem, guiding innovators on their journey and stewarding the Government of Alberta's tier funds towards the biggest economic impact for all Albertans.
So over 15 years of track record with ERA, we've invested $1 billion of tier funds. That's been leveraged 7-to-1 with private sector dollars in over 300 projects.
ERA prides itself on not just being the environmental part of the story, but also the economic part of the story. So how do we make the most meaningful impact on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also how do we have a meaningful impact on job growth?
It's not so much what we've achieved, it's how do you use that as a proof point to talk about what Alberta's achieving and how we're one piece of that tool in terms of funding the whole innovation ecosystem, in terms of good policy.
When we look at where we're headed as a province, our goal really at the end of the day is to continue to be a leader in sustainable energy development and show the world that we have the technology needed to do exactly what everybody around the world is looking to do, which is reduce emissions while meeting ever increasing demands for safe, affordable, reliable energy.
It's really, really mission critical for governments to see that technology is one of many routes forward within the circular economy that we're trying to build and hitting net zero targets. Without ERA, we wouldn't have succeeded in getting to our commercial demonstration. We would need that sort of government support and that ecosystem to bridge that gap for us.
15 years is quite incredible for an organization like Emissions Reduction Alberta. When you look back at all of the technologies that they have helped to progress, it's amazing. Quite often, sectors like the oil and gas sector get criticized for not doing enough. But if you take a look at the list of what has been funded and the impacts that funding and those technologies have had on reducing emissions in this province, I think that Albertans can be quite proud of that.
Alberta gets a lot of heat about our oil and gas industry. So being able to have an organization within Alberta which is helping to drive emissions reduction by financing novel technologies, I think it's a no-brainer. It's something that needs to continue to happen.
If some strategic gives us money, it's because they may want to use our technology and absorb the company. If a financial player gives us money, it's because they're going to try to squeeze as much cash as they can out of us, regardless of whether we make our dreams or not. But the government, for the most part, is actually benevolent. I know benevolence is not usually a word applied to a government usually, because a lot of what they do, sometimes people don't agree with, but in this case, when it's funding startups, I think they're genuinely trying to do good.
When we approached ERA, we were unknown to ERA, and so the confidence that they had to fund us to allow this transition, this visibility, and potentially this world-scale change to happen, you know, we'll always have a soft spot in our heart for ERA. And I think what we would hope is that other organizations within the country that have the ability to provide funding take notice of what ERA has done, take notice of the courage that ERA has had to be able to put their faith in individuals like us who can make the difference and drive the energy transition.
I think we're seeing a growing interest internationally in the kinds of investments we're making and in terms of the results we're seeing.
At COP, we can get ourselves into any room because, again, we're doing what the world's trying to do, and we have proof points to show how to do it.
How do we give Alberta credit for all of the great work that it's done, the foresight that the government of Alberta under the leadership of Ed Stelmach had in 2007?
Alberta is such a special place where, people are really willing to roll up their sleeves and say, look, there might be a different way, there might be a better way. How do we solve this problem? How do we do things a little bit differently? And that's really the type of thinking that Emissions Reduction Alberta is investing in.
What are we learning through this portfolio of investments that we've funded to date? What's working, what's not? What is the data that other innovators would find useful to help them tweak their own technology development? And so liberating that data, making it more accessible online is going to be a big focus for us. And just staying tuned to what other opportunities exist, both provincially, nationally, internationally, where Alberta can play a meaningful role in the emissions reduction story. We want to be part of that. We want to work with our government partners to help elevate the game that we're already in and help tell the story most effectively about what we've actually achieved in terms of emissions reduction and economic development.
15 years, nearly 300 projects, close to $1 billion invested. Those are more than numbers. They represent the tangible and measurable action taken by the government of Alberta to support a low-carbon future. Actions that started in 2007 with an idea and the governance and stewardship of Emissions Reduction Alberta to guide that idea along the way.
You stay ahead by investing in the technology, investing in the education, and taking a risk. This was a risk, because everybody was, like I said, falling back on the traditional, just tax it and change behavior. But this was taking revenue, a tax levy, and not, using it as government revenue. Like, I'm sure there were people sucking air when they heard that. How can you do that? Are they going to be responsible? Who are they going to answer to? And all of those questions. But look at the job they did.